All right, I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. So, hello everyone. Welcome back to our latest webinar series titled What Every Executive Should Know. In this series, we invite industry leaders and experts to have candid conversations about specific projects, topics, challenges they face in their data within their industry today. So be sure to follow along. Some previous webinars that we have include topics on data science, digital transformation, modern data warehouses, risk, and more. And these can be found on our website in our webinar archive. And today we have a super exciting session with two of the most talented visualization experts on the planet, Joshua Milligan and Bridget Cogley, to share what exactly does every executive need to know about visualizing data. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording, as well as any resources mentioned, will be emailed to you in the next day or so. Additionally, we will have a lightning round at the end of this webinar where we will ask, we'll rapidly fire questions at our guest speakers. So feel free to pose any questions you may have for them in the chat as we go along. And with that, I know we have a jam-packed session for you today, as per usual, and we are being conscious of time. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce today's experts. Today, we have Joshua Milligan, who is a 6-year Tableau Zen Master and recent Hall of Fame, and has been with Technion for almost 17 years. Today, Joshua is one of our very talented principal consultants. And fun fact about Joshua, he really likes Star Trek, anchovy pizza, and has a wonderful wife and 4 kids. And then today we also have the lovely Bridget Cogley. Bridget is in her 5th year as a Tableau Zen Master, as well as her 5th year at Technion. Today, Bridget is one of our bright and driven senior consultants. And fun facts about Bridget, she is an interpreter to analyst. She loves to focus on the human side of data and is currently writing a book, Functional Aesthetics in Data Visualization, with Vidya Settler, who is a researcher at Tableau, which will be published by Wiley in 2022. And interviewing our 2 incredible guests, we have Technion Senior Sales Executive with many years experience around data and analytics in various roles in industry, a true data enthusiast himself, the great Dave Haas. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to you, Dave.
Rachel, you provide the best introductions ever. Thank you so much. That was amazing. So before we kick it off and ask our experts, I wanted to share an article that I read recently that I think is really interesting and relevant to our topic today. It was in HBR in February. It's called "Why Is It So Hard to Become a Data-Driven Company?" And what's interesting, the author, Randy Bean, interviews, I believe it was close to 100 Fortune 1000 companies about their progress towards being data-driven. And one of the things that he finds year after year is the number of companies that are heavily investing in becoming data-driven continues to increase. Yet the number that actually are achieving transformational outcomes from the investment is decreasing. And in fact, this year, their percentage that they got was 29%, only 29%. Less than a third are actually achieving transformational outcomes. So why is that? There are many reasons. The most common, though, that Randy cites are 1, organizational alignment, 2, business processes, 3, resistance to change, and 4, in the top 4 is communication. And that is what we're going to talk about today. Is we know that visualizing data makes things easier to understand. And it's going to improve communications with your staff when people can understand, when they can look at something and actually understand it. So with that, we're going to dive into some questions for our experts. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to just start with Bridget. Bridget, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Just if you could tell us a little bit about, first of all, what exactly is a Zen Master for the folks out there that might not be familiar with that term before we dive in further.
So the Tableau Zen Master Program is a recognition provided by Tableau, and what they do is they look for people who represent a triad of 3 primary facets. One is that you have a deep understanding of how Tableau works. You're very skilled at it, you understand the mechanics of it. Typically you have a domain in which you specialize. So I tend to focus more on the front end. Joshua's done some really cool things with games and kind of the window calculations mastery, as well as really making it easier for people to understand. which dovetails into the second parameter, which is that you're a teacher, that you're really working either through blogs, videos, or other mechanisms in which people don't have to pay for access to help understand Tableau better. And the third is that you collaborate, that you're working with people directly, working with developers, working with a number of people to come up with new and novel solutions that make Tableau better.
Excellent. Joshua, would you like to maybe add to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up really well. When I first started using Tableau, I had no idea what a Zen Master was or anything like that. And I'd actually been using it for multiple years and was sort of self-taught, and I thought I knew it fairly well. But I remember meeting one of the very early Zen Masters. In fact, sometimes he's called the first Zen Master, Joe Mako, and having a discussion with him and walking away from that discussion realizing I don't know anything about Tableau. I don't really understand how it works or why it does what it does, but it sort of set me off on that journey of trying to figure out, yes, it's easy to use, the learning curve isn't very steep, but there's a lot of power and a lot of complexity that you can leverage to do really incredible things. And so I started following these people who were called Zen Masters by Tableau, and I engaged with them on the forums and asked questions, and I started to answer questions, and then they would tell me, hey, that's not the only way to do it, or here's another way, and it opened my mind to all kinds of possibilities. And I think that's a big part of being a Zen master, is realizing there's no one right way to solve a problem, but there is a natural flow that every person has in approaching and engaging data and uncovering insights. And it's really neat to see that and to help people and to understand the data better. And so that's kind of been my journey as being a Zen master.
You know, one of the things that I've learned from working with you both is that not only does that framework that you're talking about apply to Tableau, but the concepts that we're going to cover today really apply to any data visualization that you're going to do. And I think that's going to be valuable for the folks that are listening today. So with that, let's just dive into it. Joshua, I'd like to start with you. If you could talk to me a little bit about the approach that a Zen master takes when starting a project, the very beginning, kind of where do you start? What should you be thinking about? Yeah,
that's a really good question. You know, every project is different, and so it's hard to say that there is a, you know, one size fits all approach to starting a project. But I think the most helpful, the ones that are the most successful, are the ones where I have a big picture of what's going on. So it's not here's a data set, analyze it for us, or here's a data set, visualize it. It's how does this fit into the entire business process? What does the data mean? Who needs to understand the data? And once I start to understand that, that allows the project to unfold somewhat organically. I mean, there is a structure to it, certainly, but having that big picture and understanding that it's not just a set of numbers that we need to get to. It's not just a set of requirements. It's real people who need to understand real things going on in order to make a difference in the organization. And having that big picture, I think, is key to any project and allowing it to be successful.
I'm going to go ahead and piggyback off of Joshua a little bit, because a lot of what he's talking about is very much that 29% problem that you were showing earlier. It's a problem I'm really passionate about, in which we have this data, but how do you make it useful for humans? And how do you make it so that, as you know, a business user, I can get in, still do my job, data is a very small part of it, and that the report and everything is accessible to me as a business user. And so I really like Joshua's kind of approach of, you want to really start kind of scaled back here. You really want to understand everything that's going on. And it's, you know, that way you can really get in and start building with people in mind first. And that, I would say, that's probably my number one passion point. Simpler things, you definitely want to avoid the swoop and poop. It's really easy, particularly as a consultant. I can kind of come in and do my thing and pop right out, but you really don't want to get in and wreck the show as you get in. But you also want to make solutions that help people, build on what they already have, build on the things they're already doing well, and kind of go from there. So it's definitely an understanding of, here's all the assets you have, not just, oh, hey, this is the data. Here's the cultural artifacts that matter. Here's, things we know about our people. I've been doing, a lot of these cultural assessments, and it's been great fun and insight to see how people are using data and how their culture plays into it. And that includes things like the data, but it also includes data governance. How do you share data to the masses appropriately?
Yeah, I think, and once you have that sort of big picture and you understand the people who are involved and the decisions that they have to make, then things like data governance and the structure of the data, those do become very important things very early on in a project, because you have to know what data do we have, who has access to it, and the structure is very important, because the structure enables you to do certain kinds of analysis, or makes certain kinds of analysis very easy, or makes certain kinds of analysis very difficult. And so having that as a mindset of understanding, the data is the data, but we may have to reshape it, restructure it, in order to use it in effective ways. And I think that becomes very important early on in a project, because you can lock yourself in to a certain structure and then find out that doesn't meet our needs at all.
And I would say too, that gap analysis is just pivotal, because sometimes you're trying to answer this question and you don't have data for it. You have data to answer maybe a smaller question or a more simpler question that's not necessarily the question you want to answer. And so sometimes through that gap analysis, you can say, but I could answer this question if I pull this other data set. So sometimes having that gap analysis really helps you move forward, as well as too, really thinking about the shape proactively of what am I trying to do with this data, and making sure that not just the viz does that, but the data behind it.
I love it. I'm going to put up another slide, and I'm hoping that you guys can talk about it. This one, I'm really interested in talking about a methodology or a framework for visualization, and love to start this time with Bridget. Bridget, if you could kind of talk to this one a little bit.
So this again goes back to that 29% problem. We often have the data. We often, spend a lot of time shaping the data. You see a lot of investment too on data pipelines and preparing the data. The challenge is, okay, I have this data. I'm starting to make charts. I'm starting to kind of find my way towards this, ideal of insight. And the question is, how in the world do I get there? And this is the problem. I mean, we see numerous articles. Your article showcased it. I've got my collection of articles that showcase it. This is not a new problem, but this has been an ongoing problem. I mean, Stephen Few wrote this BI has hit a wall article over a decade ago, and we haven't fully left that. And so part of what we're trying to do through some of our solutioning is starting to shift that paradigm. So if you go ahead and go to the next slide, you can start to see where we start taking this. And what we're doing is we're trying to build a full program and looking at how do we start doing discovery and planning? How do we understand your current state? This is, if you think about design thinking, this is that whole what is before we get to that what if. All of this is really laying down that foundation, very much like what Joshua was saying. We have to understand the whole picture before we get in and start making changes. And this is really a broad picture. This isn't just, hey, you want this thing and I'll get you there. No, 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 no. I need to understand the cultural artifacts. I need to understand how people talk about numbers and what is their understanding and comfort with the abstraction of numbers. And when we do abstract, how do I help people get there? And so with that, we kind of start making that roadmap. We start saying, okay, well, you want to be here. Here's where you are today. Here's some of the cultural barriers. Here's, communication barriers that come into play. Here's where people's graphicacy levels are. Sometimes we call graphicacy data literacy, but data literacy is a much broader concept. It's, I go into my Salesforce portal, I click on this particular dropdown, and then through the life cycle of the entire data, I can find that dropdown again. That is data literacy. When we're dealing with the reading and writing of charts, that's graphicacy. It's being able to take abstract symbols and make sense of them. From there, we design and present those recommendations, and that way we really build that stair step to start getting to insight.
Amazing. Joshua, did you want to comment on this one as well?
Yeah, I mean, what I really like about this framework is that it does give some structure to the ideas that I think we've all had about we need to understand where we are, where we're going, how to get there, and who's involved. But this does provide some of that structure. And it goes back to maybe that first slide that you shared about transformation. Sometimes that's just a buzzword, and we just throw it around. We say digital transformation or data transformation. What does that really mean? I think this kind of a framework actually points out, where do you need to have that transformation? There are places where you may be doing really well. Some of your people are very data literate. Is it across the organization? And so we start to uncover, what's going well, what's not going well. I think that sort of a framework actually does facilitate true transformation, not just a buzzword, or not just we implemented some technology, but we truly equipped everyone in the organization to have access to the data they need and to be able to ask the questions and get the answers that they need to make the decisions that they need to make.
And I'm happy to even dig into this a little bit more. I know we've got another slide that kind of gives a preview of some of the product that comes from this assessment. And so you can really start to see, because one thing that we sometimes think is, okay, we're rolling out data and we come up with this idea of, one size has got to fit them all. And very much like t-shirts, one size definitely does not fit them all. And so part of what we do is we start this paradigm matrix and we say, okay, these are the types of, deployments that you can have. And within organizations, we don't find one deployment solves it. We find it's typically at least two, and oftentimes many. And so we start outlining, okay, you want a data democracy, you want people to be able to self-service, but then you still need that escalation point. You may still need certain canned reports. You may need starter packs and templates and things like that. And so we really start kind of plotting people out on this paradigm matrix of, this is what, based on culture, based on literacy, based on all of these factors that we understand within your organization, because we've benchmarked, and we've also located you on a maturity model. We've said, based on your visual presentation, based on consumption, we can actually say, this is where you're at. Here's how you get here, because we've done it. But not only have we done it, we can actually measure the trajectory and understand what the signs of maturity are.
I love it. Okay, what I'd like to do is shift gears a little bit from the framework. I want to ask my favorite question, because I hear this when we're with clients all the time. They ask, what are the most common mistakes that you guys see people making as they go on this visualization journey? And Joshua, would you like to start on this one?
Sure. So, a lot of times when people ask that, I think they're expecting answers like, don't use a pie chart with 100 slices, or, good visualization practices. And the mistake would be not using them. And I think that that's true, but that's sort of at a very, very in-depth level. The bigger mistakes, I think, because those things, the visualization techniques and things, those can all be worked through. And very iteratively, you can figure out what's not working and what does work and what communicates well. And some of that's training that can be applied. But the bigger mistakes, I think, that will almost certainly guarantee failure in a project are things like being stuck in a paradigm that isn't working and being unwilling to change. I think the idea that that we're just going to implement this new technology and it's going to solve all of our problems. It's not if you don't evaluate your approach to data first, and if you don't evaluate who needs to be involved, and not just what technology should we apply to it. There will always be new technologies, and they will be helpful, but never has a technology alone solved a problem. It's always people who solve the problems, and I think that's the key, is figuring out where we are in that maturity model, and figuring out where we need to go. And those are the mistakes that we don't want to have. Another big one is the idea that we're going to have a one-size-fits-all solution. I see this commonly with dashboards. Someone says, we're going to have a dashboard that the salesperson can log in and see what they need to see, and the sales manager can log into the same dashboard, and it's going to be a little bit different because it'll roll things up, and then the CEO can use the same dashboard, but it's going to have all this other logic that changes the chart types, and it rarely works because you've introduced so much complexity, thinking that one thing could meet everyone's needs, and rarely is that true. Much better would be very simple, lightweight things that communicate exactly what the salesperson needs, exactly what the sales manager needs, exactly what the CEO needs. And at the end of the day, that's going to be you're going to deploy that a lot faster. You're going to come to decisions a lot faster, rather than just trying to dump it out for everyone and hope that they can make sense of it.
And I always say the I want one dashboard to rule them all. It's kind of like the I want one t-shirt that fits everybody. All your super skinny people have this thing that looks like a dress or a nightgown. Anybody above a certain size is like squeezing into this thing. And then a very small share of people are actually comfortable and happy. And so it really creates this tension that doesn't need to be there. And you can make everybody a lot more successful when you size appropriately. So that's kind of my thing there. The other mistake I typically see is what I call the Pokemon effect. It's, I got all these reports, I got to put them all. And it's just, it sounds like fun. It's a great metric to have because it's like, hey, I've got 99 reports over here, none over here. I'm going to port them all. And, we can track it. It's tangible. It's a clear benchmark. But it's awful because you made those reports on a very specific paradigm, much like Joshua was talking about. You move to a new platform, and you're not embracing the reason that you purchased the platform in the first place. Like, you bought this so that you could achieve certain things. And then if we're porting over everything just as is, the shoe doesn't fit. And typically you're ending up having to break this platform in order to achieve a certain effect. It's very much like languages. When you learn a language, each language has its own grammar. All the words work within that grammar construct, and everything flows smoothly when you follow the rules. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. That would be kind of my big ones, is that whole I'm going to lift and shift them over. Really, really ends up being very stressful and not as fun. It's much better to take that time, understand why I bought this, understand my key goals, have those rules. Any type of, process or cultural change, we have these rules, no dry holes. We're not going to do this. When I deal with reports, I'm going to have these very clear rules of, this report needs to meet, the needs of 2 users, or it needs to do this. And so you want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success.
And Bridget, I didn't catch that. Did you call it the Pokemon report?
Pokemon effect.
Effect. Love it. Is that a technical term?
It is now. So it's very much Pokemon Go. You're trying to catch them all. You got to port them all. And we have this whole gamification mindset. We love numbers. When we have this number that we can track to, it's easy because we can say, I did this thing. It's over here. Check. What we don't like is ambiguity. When we have to say, okay, I have 99 reports over here. I don't know how many reports I'm going to have over here. It's really uncomfortable. It requires a lot more work. It's a lot harder to track, because 9 of these reports aren't being used. 7 of them can be consolidated into 1. This 1 needs to be ported over as 7. And so it really challenges us to think differently, and that's hard. And we often don't have time.
Well, I have one more. I have a number of questions coming in, which are cool. We're going to answer all of these, but I have one more question for you guys that I want to ask before we dive into our lightning round, where anybody can ask anything they like. But Bridget, you mentioned earlier data literacy and the importance of data literacy. Could we dive a little bit deeper into that here, from both of you? Why don't you start?
Yeah. And I'll have you share this article, but I have an article that talks about kind of the whole scale of data literacy. So you've got inputs, you've got kind of how we put it into the database and store and model it. You've got kind of the ETL transformational processes for my analysis. But then there's this really key part down here that we never touch, and that is defining. And that is where I start going, okay, I got this from Salesforce. I got this from this dropdown. I've transformed it so it's now 5 columns instead of 1. Because maybe I want it as 5 columns, maybe because multiple things can be true. And so now I have 5 columns, and I need to track that as I analyze it, as I output it. And so that's kind of that whole circle. And oftentimes we think, one person can fill it all. And, that's a unicorn. That's somebody that's, high ticket, high value. But again, what we want is where it's easy for people to go, okay, I know this field in Salesforce and I can find it here. Sometimes we call that data governance, but that's also data literacy. And data literacy is an ethics issue, because if I can't find my data, I can't make the correct assumptions. And that defining piece is super key.
Joshua?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is key. I mean, it's one thing to be able to read a chart or a graph, and sometimes that is the full scope of what people think of when they think of data literacy. And while that's a key skill, everything that Bridget said is true, because all of the assumptions that go into looking at that chart or graph, uh, those are assumptions that are either right or wrong, and having the literacy to know what those assumptions were, are they right, are they wrong, uh, that's just as essential, maybe even more so, than the fact that I can look at a trend line and say, hey, sales are up, but where did that data come from? How did we collect it? All of that, how did we transform it? All of that is just as essential, because anywhere in that process, we may have introduced something that, oh, sales actually were down.
And so particularly too with that, I mean, we've seen this play out now where we are using charts more out in the public media. We are deploying more visualizations more broadly. And so we are expecting audiences to be able to navigate that. We saw it just recently with COVID, vaccine rates, COVID, cases, defining all that. And we couldn't agree. And we couldn't truly accurately measure. And so, when you're not clear on these terms, it's a navigational issue. Just like health literacy is not, can I read and understand, medical terms? No, no, no. It's, I have a broken leg. Do I go to urgent care? Do I go to the ER? That is a navigational issue, and data literacy is truly a navigational literacy rather than a reading and writing literacy.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you both for answering all the questions. I think we've got some questions to the audience. I apologize if you guys can hear my wild dog pack in the back. I do not have a kennel here, but they're going nuts. All right. So first question is from Chris. Chris asks, how do you officially earn the moniker Zen Master?
So you're nominated. There is an open call. Usually these days it's closer to the end of the year. So about January, there's an open call. You go out to the Tableau blog, and you're typically nominated by your peers. You can also self-nominate, but it's a pretty exhaustive form to defend, how are you collaborating? How are you teaching? How are you really making Tableau more accessible to others?
Yeah, and then ultimately Tableau makes that call. So it's not voting or anything. I mean, it's they meet together and they go through all the nominations and then announce who they've selected.
And I mean, I know one year they mentioned, I mean, it was hundreds nominated and only, a very small share gets selected. I think we're up to 34 right now.
I think
There's only
No,
30.
actually, no, we're up to 40.
40. Wow.
40, I think, with the new class.
Still,
okay, yeah.
Not that many. You guys are in a class by yourselves. That's amazing. Okay. Next up is a question from Shram. Shram has a pretty detailed question here. So I'm going to just talk to the front end of it. And Shram, I'm going to offer for you to reach out to us. You'll get a survey at the end, and you can certainly let us know if you'd like to speak with us. But Shram is basically asking about how he should organize data in Excel for different types of visualizations in Tableau. And I'm not sure if there's any specific things you guys want to talk about, but there's a lot of detail here. So maybe that's a question for later down the road.
Yeah, I was just looking at that question, and yeah, I agree. I think that it is a detailed question to dive into more deeply at a future point in time. It does sort of speak to that idea of the structure of the data is very key when you think about how do you leverage it in a given tool. So Tableau, I can tackle data in almost any structure, but there are ways to make it a lot easier and a lot more intuitive to do analysis in Tableau. So I agree. The details are probably a future point in time that we need to really dive into that. But it does raise that point that thinking about how you structure that, even in Excel or a database or anywhere, is really key.
Okay. Cassandra really likes the terminology Pokemon effect. So Bridget, congratulations. I think you've just coined a term for us.
Excellent. I'm going to claim that, trademark it, and I'm rolling with it. So I need a penny for every time it's used because I figure it'll be used a lot.
Yeah.
All right. Quentin asks, Bridget, any tips for us assumed unicorns to deal with the, well, you know, how everything about data, so fix it from the C-suite?
I've been in that role. And so some of this is a bit of what I would call bad behavior. And again, that requires a level of comfort. I worked at a place, I had a boss, I reported directly to the C-suite. That was my boss. So, you know, COO would come into my office and be like, well, I need this thing in an hour. And it got to the point, I mean, I kept a Kanban board so that he was aware of these are all the things I'm working on. And, you know, this is how long it takes. This is, you know, so there was a lot of very effective communication. But the other thing was, you know, a bit of humor goes a long way. And so, yes, I did keep a hollowed out grenade in my office because he would come in and throw the proverbial grenade in my day. And I made that clear. And we had an understanding of, you aren't asking for something small, you are asking for something large. I'll do it, but it may not be A, as fast as you like, or B, you know, to that level because I don't have the data. So there is that kind of pushback. The other thing is I write a blog and you are free to share. Now, keep in mind, some of it may be rendered as passive aggressive, but I mean, I have even a post. I mean, it's a super silly post of, you know, full stack anything. And I recommend people send that because just so that they understand you are a unicorn. That is rare. And the things you can do are not easily accessible. So I hope that
Awesome.
helps.
I've got a question for Joshua here. Joshua, this is an easy one for you. Lisa asks, is there a book you recommend for execs to read to get a good overview of what they're doing and what their focus should be when collaborating on a dashboard?
Oh, well, so I think what you're getting at is I should share my book.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so I was looking for the most recent edition. I don't actually have it with me, but here's the 2019 edition. There is a 2020 one out.
My favorite's the 2019 because that's the one I reviewed.
Oh, that's right. So, and there's a 2021 coming out soon. And my publisher just told me it's getting translated into Korean. So that should be fine. No, I wrote the book as an introduction to Tableau, but I do think that I do try to communicate in there good ways of communicating data that are applicable even beyond Tableau. And so I think it does open up that discussion. But definitely it's a primer as well as an introduction to even advanced topics in Tableau and how to use it. It's all the things I wished I'd known those first few years when I taught myself. But
I wish I had known. When I
Yeah.
reviewed the book, I won't lie, I was really, really angry I didn't have that book earlier.
Got another one here. Sujai asks, what would be the most underwhelming skill to have in terms of data analysis? Would it be more of communicating your findings to stakeholders? So I think the question is focused towards maybe where is a good, valuable skill, starting point skill that doesn't take a ton of time to acquire.
I mean, I would say communication is actually a really key part because part of when you're doing requirements gathering, you've got to be able to get their mental picture. You've got to really be able to draw from them what they have in mind. And what they have in mind is not so much, you know, I want a line chart, I want this. It's more of understanding how they use it. So I'm going to do this, you know, decision. One of the things I've done before with people historically is, okay, I'm going to give you your report that you use today. What numbers do you circle? What numbers do you click? What numbers do you highlight? And that helps me understand this is how you're using it. These are the types of decisions and also following your orders. So you started here and everything is up here, but you're starting at the bottom because that's actually more important.
Yeah, I think it's the soft skills are just as important as the hard skills. So knowing Tableau is great, but as a consultant, we have to understand that, you know, that communication and the interpersonal skills of reading someone and sensing there's another question behind that question and thinking through how do we meet the needs, and who's the true audience that we need to communicate to. I mean, there's a lot there, but
I
those
would
are the skills that I think get neglected so much.
I would actually argue the soft skills are more important than the technical skills, because quite frankly, I can Google the technical skills. I can't Google soft skills.
Right.
You know, it's interesting, you guys, another one just came in that is right along this line. What are the key technical and soft skills to be a data analyst? You guys want to talk to that a little bit?
Back-end data skills are, I would say, particularly coming from the business side, you've got to have a certain level of depth with understanding the shapes of data, the many, many shapes of data, and how data can be basic level. I mean, I took an online course that was free through Stanford. I mean, it was a real quick, here's your intro to databases. And it was great. So I can't recommend that one enough. But then understanding what charts are, and beyond just, okay, here's the charts, but then how they play together and how to make them work together. And that's part of what I'm writing my book on, is how to make them work together so that people can draw better meaning. And what are the types of guardrails you can put in? And the soft skills, I mean, it really is down to, can I hear between the lines? Can I really get to what you're doing? Design thinking, and a lot, this term gets bandied about, but there is a Darden University course, and I strongly recommend that, where they really go through, this is design thinking, this is a process, it works. I literally have taken it and replicated it into Trello and run with it.
Love it. Love it. Okay. We've got another one here. What are some tips for communicating data literacy between business departments when each department collects and stores data in different processes before they eventually are funneled into Tableau? Joshua, do you want to start that one?
Ooh, that's actually a really good question, but kind of a tough one too, because I've been in that situation where you've got different departments or different people, even individuals, who are doing their own thing. And I think it goes back to that whole idea of understanding organizationally what's the paradigm that we want to adopt or transition to, or have everyone think about. So part of it could be training, part of it is adoption of common good practices, a common platform of technology. Those can be key things, but I think ultimately it's that communication of, here's what we're going to do, here's why it's important that we're going to do it, and here's the ultimate result that we're driving towards. And I think once you give everyone that vision and that breadth, that's when you'll start to see people really buy into it, that, oh, okay, I shouldn't just keep my 2,000 Excel documents in my own personal computer. I really do need to have this accessible and in a format that can be used, because I understand why it's important and how it's going to be used elsewhere.
And I would jump in and just say, again, the more you can put things towards a standard database, the better your life will be. As long as you're living in kind of the Excel shop, it's really, really hard because you don't share definitions, and it is that defining piece. And so data governance covers a part of that, but a big part of that is really coming together, making sure that we share the same language, and that we're collecting data and storing it in a way that makes it easier for us to get along and not harder.
All right, a couple more. Lisa asks, what is the name of that course that Bridget just recommended?
So I've got the databases by Stanford University, and then I've also got the design thinking by Darden University.
And Lisa, we can follow up afterwards and provide you some links, perhaps, if you have trouble finding those. Just let us know. Okay, one more. Quentin asks, another difficult one for you guys. How do you emphasize the urgency and need of good data quality? For example, uniform registration, etc. Who wants to tackle data governance?
Well, so coming at it from a data visualization standpoint, one of the most effective ways is just to show what the results are of bad data or missing data. So if I show someone, here's what sales looks like, but we have these gaps. Here's what patient care looks like, but because everyone's putting in their own funny comments in this free form text field, here's why we can't really use it effectively. And I think all of a sudden that starts to really illustrate and if I take that to the key people, then I can affect change on that end. And all of a sudden a freeform text field becomes a dropdown with standard choices, or there's another way of possibly inputting that data so that it's usable. And that's to me, that's the most effective way I've seen it. It's communication. I do it visually,
Mhm.
but you have to, in one way or another, you have to take it back to the source and say, here's what it's causing, here's the problem it's causing, uh, and why we can't use the data the way it's coming through.
And I would say make them feel the pain. I mean, if you funnel it into Tableau as is and let them see that, oh, we've got this open text field and 9,000 options, they're going to get really angry. It's, if you've ever read the book Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, it's piling the gloves on the table so you can really start to see the scope of the problem. And so the more people feel it and get a sense of it themselves, of here's what it takes to make this usable, let's do better. Here's how we can do better. Here's how we can either visualize the data to see what we need to combine. Here's, if we put this to a drop down and then allow certain caveats in this manner, we can have a much easier go of it.
All right, one more good one here. Did it take a lot of time and effort to develop a process of your own for understanding the data and presenting it? And how did you figure it out?
So I learned to work with data kind of trial by fire. I worked for a startup. I reported to the C-suite and very much learned on the job. And so it was I would get a call, hey, can you find out this? And I'm going into this meeting in 5 minutes. Can you and so it was very much, I learned to do a lot of quick analysis so that by the time I rolled to consulting, I was very comfortable in the speed, and I actually had to learn to slow down. And I was given a whole window. Like I would go from, I have 30 minutes to make a dashboard to I have a whole week. And I didn't know what to do with that. I was so tickled. I'm also very much a process driven person. I am the person that backs my car into the parking lot. And so I'm always trying to figure out, how do I build, better? How do I do this better?
Yeah, and I would say yes, it did take a long time. I mean, I think, Rachel, when she introduced us, she mentioned how long we've been at Technion or whatever. I would say we are just in the last couple of years, we have started to really formalize this process, because I think up until now, we've thought, well, we have the skills, we have, technical skills, we have soft skills, we can do it, but we're each doing it our own way. And so Bridget comes in and says, well, what if we really thought about some of the research that's gone on behind the scenes, and what if we formalize that, and we put a structure and a framework that's reusable, that is efficient, that really helps us. So yes, it's taken a long time to get there, and then it's taken, a lot of collaboration and a lot of work, especially on Bridget's part, to think through how do we really put this together as a process that works well and effectively and consistently. But I'm excited, because I think we're actually at that point where we've got a process that it's exciting. We can take it places, and we can really use it to help people.
I love it. We've got some more questions coming in, but before we dive into those, or maybe why we dive into that, Rachel, would you mind? I think we have a couple of questions for you guys. If you wouldn't mind answering these, a couple poll questions. And while you guys are looking at those, let me read this question that just came in. Okay, Marcelo asked, do you have any thoughts on how to future-proof against biased readings, avoid common cognitive biases from users of interactive dashboards?
So one of the things, I call that putting in guardrails. And probably one of the best examples I've ever seen was Layla Mannheim did this scatter plot. It's the Hans Rosling scatter plot. But then she put in all these things on the side, and she put in beautiful annotation and all this detail on demand to really help facilitate the understanding of, this is what this means. Part of what we're writing about in our book is around ambiguity, and part of how those biases happen is ambiguity. So the more we translate, the more we make things a little bit more tangible and share those definitions. So it's back to that whole data literacy piece, and defining and making sure that when I say this thing, I understand what it means, but that too, I'm also understanding where that person's graphicacy level truly is. And so that as they see, the line charts are actually fairly abstract is what, I've kind of found. And so helping facilitate people in understanding what's going on with that line chart. And so, those are some of the tools. So, sometimes it's annotation, sometimes it's, extra charts, and really looking at this from the end user side. How are they interpreting this? I also road test. I am a big, big fan of, okay, I'm going to give this to you, and you. I'm not going to teach you how to use it. I'm going to let you click. I'm going to watch you, and I'm going to have you verbalize what you're thinking and understanding. So that way I can say, ha, that's where the problem is.
And communicating the uncertainty is key. If there's something where we have 90% certainty that the data tells us this, we can't show it in a graph as 100% certainty. We need to visually or otherwise communicate that level of uncertainty. If there are gaps in the data, we need to make it clear that there are gaps in the data and not present it as this is absolute truth and absolute certainty when it's not. And that builds trust. That also avoids some of those biases that can creep in when I'm looking at something and I assume that it means something that it's not so certain that it really means that.
All right, one more and we'll wrap it up. Quentin asks, what are the most essential soft skills you have found to help to implement positive change?
So it's a combination. I actually rely a lot on my interpreting skills. And it's, analyzing mood, intent, looking at the setting itself and understanding those cultural barriers, because the reality is how change doesn't happen is because either I'm scared, I'm overwhelmed. A lot of times when you think about Six Sigma, I mean, they go through a lot of like training is really the worst way to make change, because by the time you're training, everything else has failed. And so you really want to, fix everything before you get to training. You want to make sure your visualizations have appropriate guardrails, that you don't have to train on them. And, this doesn't mean you can't make complex visuals. It means that if you make something complex, people have enough ways to learn how to use it without you there. And I want to be very clear on that. The other thing is there is a book, Switch by Chip and Dan Heath. I cannot recommend that book. I have like 3 books I recommend often, and that is probably the #1 book I recommend. And the reason is because it talks about how do you make a change. It talks about directing the writer. It talks about motivating the elephant. But the other part is it talks about shaping the path. And I really like that book because you can really look at your organization and understand where is the problem. So do you need to motivate the elephant? I worked at a place I had to make people raging to get anything. And so I learned. But your organization may not be that way. It may need the path shaped. It may need more logical appeals.
And what was the name of that book, Bridget?
Switch by Chip and Dan Heath.
Chip and Dan Heath. Excellent. Joshua?
I mean, I would echo a lot of that. I think I go back to the communication, just being open and transparent. I think it solves a lot of issues that arise, but it heads them off before we get there. If there's something missing in the data, something missing in the requirements, or I get the sense that these are requirements that are coming down from the top, but it's not going to meet the needs. If I stay silent about that and just do build out whatever I'm told, that's really not going to meet the needs that are really present. So I think being sensitive to that, again, it goes back to that big picture, understanding how it fits in. That helps a lot of not just what to do, but who is involved and who am I really trying to help here at the end of the day. And that solves a lot of things up front.
All right. I know I called the last one the last question. If you guys have time, there's one more that came in. It's really good. And if you guys wouldn't mind answering, it's from Anuj. How would you tackle a situation where you have a predefined prototype coming from your customer and stick to that? Less scope for innovation, very limited time, facing challenges with a gauge chart, which isn't built into Tableau. What do you guys think about that one?
So I call that design to spec, and it's really hard when you get these design to spec, particularly when they are not designed in the tool. So it's very much, I want this type of, business structure. When we do architecture, we do these land surveys, and you go and you make sure that the ground can hold the structure you're putting on it. So you don't want a super tall structure on a really sandy, area. And I kind of consider this very much the same. I'm architecting a solution, on a platform it really wasn't designed to work on. And I spend a bunch of time trying to arm wrestle people the other way. Joshua's probably a little bit more forgiving. I'm very much, I really try to get people off of it. And, I will sometimes do bad behavior of, hey, here's a bullet chart, I can make this. Here's this, I can make this. Here's this, I can make this. And then, I really, really try hard not to. But I'll also let Joshua answer.
Yeah, no, I do. I really like that approach of giving options. So yes, I was asked for a gauge, but here are some other ways you can see the data. 8 times out of 10, they'll look at it and say, oh, that does make more sense, or that does work. There are times when it's not going to be flexible. And I think that's one of those soft skills of understanding when is there some flexibility and I can push back, when is there not going to be flexibility and I'm just going to have to make it work however I can make it work. And sometimes the answer is like, it's not going to be possible. If I have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of budget, and you want this, it's not going to fit in that time and budget. And it goes back to that communication again of just being open and honest and saying, I can't do it. If you want to add 40 hours, then sure, then I can make a gauge for you. But otherwise we're stuck with this, and this is better.
And I find analogies help. So the more you can find comparable analogies of, in architecture, we have to do a land survey. We have to do these things so the building doesn't fall over. You don't want that. And that's kind of, I try to find these comparables, particularly that work with the industry they're working in, because then that's speaking their language.
Yeah.
Amazing. Great interviews. Really appreciate you guys. Rachel, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. This was an awesome session, you guys. And a reminder, it was recorded. So the recording and then any of the resources that Bridget and Joshua mentioned, we'll try to include that in the follow-up, and that will be sent out in the next day or so. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you guys so much for tuning in today. We hope to see you next time.